like to honor the time of those who got here on time, and then we'll just let others join us as they arrive. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Esther, and thank you for continuing to participate in the ongoing discussions regarding Portland Public Schools Phase 2 Charge, which is focused on enrollment and program balancing in Southeast Portland. I have my colleague here as well, Margaret Calvert, and she is the Regional Superintendent overseeing secondary schools in Portland Public Schools. I'm delighted to have her support. We want to welcome our members of our board of directors. We want to also welcome Flow Analytics, Karina and Brick Architectural Firm, our principals, and the Southeast Guiding Coalition members. Before we go any further though, I do want us to go to the land acknowledgement. So next slide, please. Land acknowledgement and anti-oppression statement. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is a land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the First Peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Chinook, the Clackamas, the Calapria, the Multnomah, the Wasco, the Cathlamet, the Tualatin, and Malala peoples. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices they made. Let us acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area as well: the Grand Ronde, the Siletz, and the Cowlitz. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who has been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Next slide, please. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that would be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impacts of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families in many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty priorities and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land and those who have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal. Next slide. So on Thursday, the 20th of October, the PPS team, with the support of Flow Analytics, presented two proposals, namely Proposal A and Proposal B. Members of the Southeast Guiding Coalition were split up into three different rooms: Clackamas, Columbia, and Willamette. We reviewed a lot of demographic data in an effort to provide the most reasonable possibilities within our scenarios, in an effort to create opportunities for robust discussion in our meeting sessions. On Saturday, we provided the opportunity for members to identify the pros and cons of each scenario. Tonight, we're going to revisit our updated guardrails, what impacted communities we haven't heard from. We'll respond to Southeast Guiding Coalition questions that were generated by the group. We'll continue the analysis of the two proposed scenarios, and we will also receive input on a third option, looking at the drivers that have resulted in this decision. Update and next steps will be later. Next slide, please.
Thank you,
I'd like to
Esther.
hand over to Karina to continue.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. As we normally do, as we start these meetings, we want to invite you to take a look and to sort of center yourself around these group agreements, right? You will notice that we added some new ones to the bottom of the list about kind of how we will be in community with one another, especially as we get into the small breakout groups, to address some of the comments that we've heard from you as SEGC members in terms of kind of wanting to ensure that there is equity of voice in the discussions, right? That we want to ensure that everyone has a chance to speak as we process this together, and that the conversation is as productive and shares as many viewpoints as we can get in our time together. So we will reiterate that as we go into our small groups, but want to be sure that everyone is on board with that as a process kind of moving forward. Does anyone have any comments, anything about these group agreements, anything that you need to sort of bring your best self to these meetings tonight? Because we understand the personal and emotional nature of these conversations, but we also want to ensure that we are proceeding with as much respect as we possibly can for one another, and to give each other enough room to really ensure that we're getting all the voices in the room that we have.
I just also quickly want to add, as you're thinking about that the session is being recorded, the chat is public. Please mute and please manage your emotions.
Next one. So this is what you just heard from Dr. O, right? Not only is this session being recorded, which you all heard when you logged in, it's also streaming live. Understand that the audios, we are hearing the same thing, right? That the audio is having some issues. So tech folks at PPS are dealing with that. However, the folks will not be able to, people that are not as in this meeting will not be able to listen live to the breakout rooms. Those will be recorded and will be available on the program enrollment and program balancing website later next week or early next week. So as we always do when we start our meetings, we're going to go into a checkout exercise or check-in exercise. Marnie is going to kind of give us the rules of the road there, but I want to introduce the question, which is, if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would that be, right? If you today got to pick anyone in the world, past or present, that you would have dinner with, who would that be?
Okay, we have a kind of luxurious 10-minute check-in. So these rooms are 2 people and 3 people. So manage your time to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, and remember to catch each other's responses and ideas with care. So I am going to go ahead and send you off. I've gotten a few people since I made them, so I'll send you as well as we go. Have fun.
I want to take a moment to talk about what we're calling kind of the updated guardrails. So Claire, would you lead us in this work, please?
Sure. And first, I want to start with the map before you. It has school location colors to show where we have under enrollment and over enrollment challenges in our Southeast schools, and also the single strands. And these things impact student access to programming and teacher opportunities for collaboration and effective planning. So the issues of under-enrollment and single-strand programming are more likely to appear in schools with higher concentrations of BIPOC and low-income students. If we address these issues, we will create conditions to support more equitable opportunities and increased achievement of these students and others. So we just wanted to kind of, I know that many of you are here representing a school or a program, and just wanted to highlight for just thinking as we're doing our work today, that we're really looking at the region and finding solutions for all the schools in the region, and just kind of helping people have a visual of which schools are needing what kind of supports. Next slide, please. So on this,
I apologize, but what does the gray mean? That's not on the key from what I could see.
So it isn't experiencing those challenges.
Thank you.
So it's a school that, okay, thank you. And so now we wanted to make sure you saw that we have updated our grade guardrails. We've been listening to your concerns and feedback, and we heard you in our last two sessions as we're going through proposal A and B. We took every question you asked and gave responses. Hopefully you received those in your email today. And we are broadening the range of solutions for our DLI programs to include co-location. So we have asked Flow Analytics to develop a third draft proposal for your review that has co-located DLI programs and addresses as many of the single strand issues as possible. You can see how we've updated with green text to include co-located schools with a goal of limiting single strand neighborhood or DLI programs in schools. So just keeping, we want to be responsive to what we're hearing from our members, and you will have an opportunity later this evening to provide some input for that in terms of what drivers will guide that third proposal. So with that, I want to turn it back to Karina, and she will share some of our responses to what we heard in our last two meetings.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I think part of the work that's been happening frantically behind the scenes is the district has been really working hard to listen to the questions that were being asked in the last Thursday's meeting and Saturday's meeting, and then across Discord, to ensure that they're getting you the information you need. So earlier today, I believe you should have all received responses to the 65 questions that came from the last two sessions. Also sent out a document on the two topics that we most heard from you, right? Around DLI and creative science, talking about what some of those drivers were. I'll get into those in a moment. And as much as we want to focus, those are the two areas that we continue to highlight, right? The schools that are impacted by the DLI change and the schools that are impacted by the CSS change. It's important to remember that many other school challenges and changes are being considered throughout the entire Southeast region. And so we're going to have instructional leaders available to join the breakout groups to develop further understanding as you process both proposal A and proposal B, and then also as you think about what the drivers should be for the potential for proposal C. And we have specifically instructional leaders that are here with DLI experience and CSS experience. So next, Marnie. I'll start by recapping a little bit about what the responses were. Again, this all comes from the document that you all should have received today, which was a 9-page rationale document that talks about kind of whole school DLI questions that we've heard in the SCGC meetings, right? So the goal of a whole school DLI approach is that the district believes it allows for, a real shared vision and set of goals that focus on high quality, rigorous instruction to support multiculturalism, biliteracy, and bilingualism. As you can see, I'm not going to read out the specific bulleted items, but a whole school DLI model aligns with and leverages the resources to provide better support and for students and educators, including those. So I think that what the district is saying, we recognize the value of whole school DLI and we still support that. However, understanding what the concerns are in the community, we want to also look at, are there opportunities to look at, you know, continuing to move forward co-located models while trying to limit the single strand models, which are the ones that really are kind of the hardest to support from a instructional standpoint in terms of student outcomes. Next. Then the other main sort of crux of the questions that we've received over the course of the last 2 meetings and in Discord has been relative to creative science. In the document that PPS sent out earlier today, the key pieces were, you know, everyone was wondering, like, why creative science and why has that become a driver? And the main reason for that was because the board charge really was to look at Harrison Park, right? And moving Harrison Park from a K-8 to a middle and K-5 program. And if we want to keep Harrison Park, one of our most diverse schools in the neighborhood, as a K-5 neighborhood community together, which we heard very loudly, not only through listening and learning with the Harrison Park community, but then also with the SCGC. And we know that that school, transportation is a big impact for that school, right? So walking to school is an important factor. We must look at the Clark building as the viable location for Harrison Park students and families because of its proximity to its existing location. And so since creative science currently occupies that building, there will need to be a relocation of creative science somewhere else, right? The other piece that was in the rationale that was provided was around the educational options policy and the idea of why a program kind of exists along a K-8 continuum, right? That the goal of the district is to provide educational options for students and to allow students and their families to make choices about different learning needs and wanting to ensure that there are options. I believe there are 5 or 6 that were laid out in the rationale that the board is interested in maintaining as alternatives. That being said, next. Sorry, Marnie, next slide. Oh, went up. Thank you. In the rationale, it was also made clear the sort of parameters around the opt-out, right? That students in any focus option school may return to a neighborhood school at any grade level, but specifically to this process, you know, there were concerns, especially around Arleta and about, you know, whether families that wanted to choose a more traditional neighborhood model for middle school could do that, right? And so the district has clarified that if folks want the comprehensive middle school experience for 6-8, if Arleta families specifically want that for 6-8, that they may opt out of the neighborhood, they may opt out to a neighborhood school as part of any of these proposals, and that there is enough sort of backlog of interest at the 6-8 level for creative science to offset any 5th grade attrition. So those are kind of the key elements relative to DLI and CSS that were included in the data that was sent out today. So does anyone have, I guess at this point, what we want to do is open it up to any other key pieces of information that people have questions about, having received and processed the data that was sent out today.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead. I can't see who it is.
My name's Andrew Harvey.
Okay. Hi, Andrew.
I just was curious because you just asked about us, what our comments are on data that was sent today. For me personally, receiving data on the same day that we're supposed to be discussing it is challenging just because of time. And last year, I understood that data would be sent in advance of meetings, so it would be more digestible rather than laying it on everybody the day of a meeting. I just wanted to observe that.
I second
Andrew,
that.
I so appreciate you bringing this up. I want to say that we got a lot of questions and a lot of input on Thursday and Saturday. And usually we have a week in between where we can have time to respond and create the materials. And because of the shortness of the time, we really wanted to do a thorough job of getting to your responses. We understand that you didn't have time to read it before this meeting. And if we could have done it any earlier, we would have done so. But I can tell you that we worked night and day to get everything ready in this short time span. So I appreciate the comment, and it is our commitment to get materials out earlier. And this week with the delay because of the data, it just made it just nearly impossible to do it any earlier.
I think, sorry, I do want to, I appreciate that, Claire. One thing that I misstated because it was a typo in the rationale document is that what I talk about here for Arleta families may opting out, same applies to Woodstock. So it's Arleta and Woodstock because those are the two options for creative science. Andy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Here, I'll lower my hand. By the way, I appreciate on the DLI stuff, Karina. I think the way you framed it just now was helpful in terms, because one of the questions I had just reading that you guys were gonna kind of include co-located programs as an option was like just what happened in the last week, because it was sort of seemed so confident about whole school DLI. But I think the way you framed it just now around, you know, we recognize the benefits of whole school DLI, but also like what we're really zeroing in on is the issues with single strand co-locations. I think I'm interested to discuss that more, but I thought that was helpful. On creative science, I'm sorry to be a broken record on this, but I feel like the explanation we're getting on this is still like working backwards from like board policy and stuff. And I think, and others can jump in if I'm misstating this, I feel like the spirit of the question that a lot of folks asked was, how did you weigh the policy that you feel requires you to keep creative science specifically as a K-8 against the incredible disruption it's going to cause to Woodstock or Arleta by relocating it as a K-8? I think we're supposed to be working backwards here from sort of what's best for kids across Southeast. So like, what is the benefit for kids across Southeast that you see from this solution compared to other ways that you could handle it? I think that's what I'm still stuck on.
I appreciate that, Andy. And I know that we have creative science folks, the instructional leaders that are looking to, that can speak to that in the breakout rooms. Claire, I don't know if there's anything from a district perspective that you want to provide or have Misha provide. Oh, you're on mute, Claire, sorry.
Of course I am. Excuse me. I'm trying to keep all the noises of the household out of the meeting. So the school was approved as a K-8 option school, and because it was approved by the board through resolution as a K-8, and the reason we quoted the policy was because it describes the intent of having focused option schools to provide choices for our families, for our students. And there is a high demand for creative science, especially at 6th grade as a middle school option. Even when students leave creative science to go to a comprehensive middle school, there are other families that are wanting a smaller K-8 experience rather than a comprehensive middle school. And so it is something our board has put in place and that we have carried forward with that adoption of that resolution when they created the creative science school. So, and I don't know if Misha, if that's something else that you'd want to add to that, but I'm really talking more from a district perspective, but Misha has experience with the program in her former position as well.
Well, I feel like I can only speak from my understanding of that it is a focused option, and and other schools are neighborhood. And as Claire said, with that resolution, and the need to have options for students, that this wouldn't be an area where we look at splitting it to a K5 or a 6-8, or making it just a K5. And I feel like that would need to come either from the board as a resolution, or through a focus option review, which is a different process outside of this. And it would just make me wonder, if we're doing this for creative science, what we also need to be doing the focus option review for other programs and schools as well. So I just saw a lot of hands go up.
I see a lot of hands go up. I believe Elizabeth had her hand up first.
Kind of went up and then it went down and then it went up again.
Kind of coming back, don't know what
I'm like, I'm not sure what I want to ask. I want to make a comment first about how materials are made available to us. I think that there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of work to be done, I think, on all ends. And I appreciate that, I just want to observe that I think the timeline was created by PPS, and the burden of responsibility for adhering to the timeline is occurring to the participants as volunteers. And the pushback of the timing, the rescheduling of the meeting, all we keep hearing is, yes, it's unavoidable, but we must move forward and carry on. And I would really like to hear an acknowledgement that we get that this is creating an outsized impact on you guys as participants. I think that would be just a nice thing to hear, not it's unavoidable and we must carry forward. The questions I have about creative science are, they're more meta. There's a couple of questions that I've kind of put out there and I haven't seen responses to. One is, what is a percentage of focused option schools in Southeast as relates to the rest of the district? And do we have more or less or an equal number of focused option schools? What other schools were looked at that could accommodate creative science, and why are they not being moved forward? So why specifically have we chosen to look at Arleta and Woodstock? And it just feels like there are a lot of sidebars that are beyond the 4 that we see here that are impacting and really constraining our ability to look at this in a holistic way. So it feels like, and I know people from these schools aren't going to appreciate it, and I'm not trying to target people, but I'm like, it seems like schools are not on the table to be looked at, Creston being one of them. And I'm just wondering, like, are we creating so many constraints that it's really making this a more impossible task than it already is?
Thank you, Elizabeth. I guess I will say on the district's behalf, certainly from my perspective as a facilitator, I know that you are being fed information from a fire hose. And I recognize the impact that has on you. I guess I'm in a unique position because I'm not really associated with either camp. So I can see the fire hose of information that's coming at the district that they're trying to process. And I can certainly see the impact that has to you as Southeast Guiding Coalition members and to the community at large. So from my seat and on behalf of PPS, I want to start by saying, definitely we acknowledge that, right? We hear that. In terms of the question that you asked relative to creative science, I will leave it to Claire to add anything. But one of the things that I understand, and Claire, certainly correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the other alternatives when we're looking at the potential third scenario is to potentially look at, is there another location that could work for creative science? Is that correct, Claire?
Yes, we are including that in the scenario development, and we have done some analysis today, as a matter of fact, in terms of classrooms, because there was questions about where things would fit, and so we will share that data with you so that you can have that in terms of the number of classrooms needed. We did it both for Woodstock and Arleta, and we will do that as soon as we know the third scenario school selection and what will fit, and we will share that with you. I believe it's, I need to check in with staff to confirm that it's ready to be shared, but it will get to you very soon.
Okay, Beth, then I believe you were up next, and Alyssa, I see you. I'm coming to you next, and Sandra, I see you as well.
I just want to mention that I didn't hear anything in that rationale about the impact to Woodstock and Arleta. It was all about the CSS program, and that's my main concern is how are we weighing, and how would we even begin to weigh which of these proposals is the more, will get us to the result that we want in terms of our charge and in terms of racial equity, when we aren't being given a rationale that includes the impact to those neighborhood school communities. And then what I'm hearing from this reaction, from the response, is that the district's priority, based on a resolution from 2009, which was prior to the district's racial equity policy, prior to the current board that sits at Portland Public Schools now, is based on that. Maintaining the middle grades of this focus option program is taking priority over the neighborhood impact at Woodstock and Arleta. That's what I'm hearing. So if that could be clarified, or if I'm missing something, I would love to hear it, but I'm not quite satisfied yet.
So I think that is addressed to me. So I just will go ahead and respond. Every proposal has layers of impact on schools, and there isn't one school that is, other than in our charge, we've been given specifics about Harrison Park and Lane, and then also having a location for creative science because of the need for a location for the Harrison Park K-5. So the pieces, it is not, what I'm hoping is that the Southeast Guiding Coalition, through vetting the scenarios, reminding that these proposals are just that, they're proposals. They are initial draft proposals, and the thing that we're expecting from the Southeast Guiding Coalition is to make changes to them. So this is the first draft of these two proposals, and we'll have a first draft of a third proposal. And we will be getting your suggestions for change in them, and then also getting input from the community that we hope you will take into account, and even the voices that we don't hear from, but remembering those families and students exist, and that you're making the best solution possible and making a recommendation for the region. So this is, none of these proposals are intended to be the perfect solution. And we know that with all of your joint experience, that you're only going to make them better and richer than what we started with. So I don't want us to get hung up with where it stands right now, but where do we need to get to, and really start talking about what possibilities are there for making them even better.
Alyssa, you've been patiently waiting.
Yeah. Thank you. I am gonna maybe beat a dead horse a little bit, but say that I too am not satisfied with the answers that are being given for the benefit of breaking up two thriving communities, which would either be Arleta or Woodstock, to house a focus option school that serves a very small sliver of students. I'm not saying that it's not a good school or that they don't deserve to have a place. They do. But what is not coming forward is, and it's not an, we're not getting a very direct answer about why do our communities need to be completely disrupted? How does that benefit the equity amongst the Southeast schools, where we still aren't clear on that? I also would like to state, just kind of on the public record, that I can't speak for Arleta, but I think at Woodstock we feel if you look at the scenarios that have been given that were presented with the guardrails in place that we all thought were non-negotiable until tonight, we have the most impact on breaking up our school. Like, no matter how you look at it, we have the most people peeled off and sent to lots of different places. And no one has shared with us how this benefits the larger community. Like, we don't feel that it's good for us, but maybe if we understood the greater good behind it, it would be easier to deal with. And if other schools are having district representatives come and speak to them, why can't we have that? Like, why is that not afforded to us as well? Thank you for taking my question. Well, my comment, really.
Thank you, Alyssa. Sandra, I believe you were next.
I would like to echo Alyssa's statement that we, our lead as a community, also feel that PPS has not risen to the occasion to justify the complete displacement of either of our schools. And the fact that if we did feel that this was, or were given reasons why this would be an overarching positive for the Southeast Portland students, it would be a lot easier to understand the motivation behind this. I have a few points that I wanted to make. The first being that Arleta, unique from Woodstock, for those who aren't aware, Arleta was a K-8 until this year. This is our first year as a K-5. Arleta faced distinct challenges as a K-8 school. Now, while those have not been addressed, I feel like they need to be, because we're not just talking about CSS coming in and now the entire school is CSS. In our documents, it states that the majority percentage of students at the new CSS will be drawn from the neighborhood. The challenges that we face as a K-8 were as a neighborhood school. To that end, those challenges will likely resurface. There is no plan and even no mention of how those will be addressed by CSS. Putting CSS into the Arleta neighborhood and having a majority of students in the Arleta catchment will cause issues. Like, how have we magically solved these issues just by suggesting that CSS come to Arleta? Second being, we've been told that this focus option review process is not feasible, that there hasn't been time for it, although we knew that CSS would be looking for a new building last year. Certainly PPS knew, longer than us SEGC participants knew. On top of that, I don't understand how you can say that we would have to give a focus option review to every other school. Not every other school is being turned into a neighborhood focus option hybrid. This is a unique circumstance, and this unique circumstance calls for a unique timeline. And I think it does call for a focus option review and a review of whether CSS might be better served as a K-5. We have serious concerns of reverting to a K-8 program. Third, I have been told, or we've been told, that the school was promised, as Beth pointed out, before the Res J, before this board was on board, that they would remain a K-8. And I have concerns regarding the promises that PPS keeps and those that they break. We were a K-8 school, we're a K-5 school now. We were told we'd be a K-5, and now it's being proposed that we're turned back into a K-8 school, and we reject that proposal on behalf of our students. And I think that would be, we're being asked to displace 3,000 students in this process. And I really think, although I appreciate the rationale document that was sent and the answers provided, I truly do, I think that it leaves a lot unanswered.
Thank you, Sandra. Director Brim-Edwards.
Thank you. So I just wanted to speak to this question because I was on the board in the early 2000s when that policy was written, and having a really clear path for when a new school is right in the middle of No Child Left Behind, and there was new schools being initiated and some being closed and some being transitioned. And, I wasn't on the board in 2009 when this was passed, but, when I look at it from a the context is what I see as a resolution is converting a program to a school, which is what the policy requires, that you have a like school designation and there's a resolution. But I don't believe, just my recollection of the conversations, that it was like, and it's going to be a school of this configuration, but more it's moving from a program which has different enrollment and doesn't have a neighborhood boundary, to a school which is a very official designation with the state. That's one thing, but I didn't hear a flex at the time that was created, like an inflexibility around like you couldn't change, you can't change it from being a school back to a program without a whole process. But I didn't hear like that you couldn't change grade level configuration. So to me, that's an open question, but I don't think the resolution is like, well, that's the in say it was got to be a K-8. And I think it would be useful to look at the context and the time, because I believe that's the point in time when a lot of the schools in Southeast were being converted to K-8. So it was kind of like what everybody else was doing. It wasn't like this is just a thing for CSS. So I think that's worth looking at. I also, so again, I don't see in the resolution that there is a commitment, and I don't think when the board had its discussion about the charge for this phase of this phase of the Southeast Guidance Coalition, that there was any sort of discussion about that. Like, are we affirming the 2009 resolution or not? So again, it's a historical document that I think is, there should be a conversation about. And I think about a lot of the things. I just think it's worthwhile. Having lived in Southeast almost my entire life for over 50 years, we have a lot of focus programs, and there's very few just neighborhood only schools, which makes us unique in the entire city. And I think that should be taken into consideration as part of this process. And I view it always as one of my roles as a board member to like talk to other board members who live in different parts of the city, because I think it doesn't dawn on them. But I hope that's taken into consideration, that in Southeast, if in terms of education options, if people wanted a neighborhood school that they could walk to, that's not always an option, because a lot of the neighborhood schools, and I can walk through the history of them, are no longer neighborhood schools or neighborhood schools only. So I would, I think this is like an open question that needs to be talked about, because I know from a school standpoint, if we are moving to comprehensive middle schools because of the staffing issues and everything else that oops, my battery's going to die. Sorry, I'm gonna log out here because my battery's dying. Anyway, I think it's a question that we should talk about, because if we're moving to a middle school model, that is, should be on the table for any existing K-8 in the city.
Thank you, Director Edwards. Okay, Dr. O, we're going to have you kind of have, we are capturing the comments in the chat as well. So thank you for those. Dr. O, I'm going to let you have the last word before we go into small groups.
Thank you. And I just wanted to quickly respond to Elisa's comment about district reps not being at their meetings. We're actually out there in meetings. The principals just have to reach out to us to say, here's when we're holding our meetings, and we will be there to support. I've been to a couple. My direct reports have also been to a couple. We just need to know. But I want you to know that we are out there in these meetings addressing concerns and taking questions back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O.
Sure.
Alyssa, can your comment I just want to, we need to
Yeah.
get into the rooms because a
It'll
lot of
be-
the conversation. Okay, go
It'll
ahead.
be very fast. Thank you, Dr. O. I appreciate it. My understanding from our principal in a meeting that our reps had with him on Monday was that he was going to invite somebody from our from district leadership to come and talk to our school yesterday. And we did have some folks, but we didn't have folks who knew quite as much about the process. And I think we're looking for people such as yourself, like,
Okay.
and more on that level. So
Okay, just let us know. We'll be out there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. So again, appreciate the comments and understand what the main thing that we're hearing is need to create a better understanding what the ResJ implications are specific to CSS and even to a certain extent DLI. Just what are the ResJ impacts based on these two scenarios. And we're going to get an opportunity to talk about those in our small groups, because really our goal right now is to go into small breakout groups to really have a conversation around, first of all, what impacted communities haven't we heard from, right? We really are we've focused a lot of our conversations around the schools that are impacted by DLI and the schools that are impacted by CSS. But whose voices haven't we heard, and what communities do we still need to hear from, and if they are not a part of this process, how do we ensure that their voices get in the room, right? So that's really the focus of our first breakout room. So we're going to go into breakout rooms for 15 minutes. Marnie's going to push us. They will be a couple of things to announce about those. We will have note takers and facilitators. We will have representatives from the instructional side, both instructional leadership, DLI focus, and CSS focus in those rooms. We have, one of the things that we heard was that people wanted to hear more perspectives from other schools. And so there's been some shuffling of the rooms that has occurred to ensure that we are providing kind of a greater variety of voices in the room in terms of what schools are represented. And then just a reminder that we want to ensure that all of the voices in the room are heard. So we will be monitoring that pretty strictly today to just be sure that there aren't single voices that are we're taking up a lot of space in the room and not allowing for others. Okay, Marnie? Anything else to share before we push folks to small groups?
Yes, I would like to reiterate that when the way that we all process is so different. So some people really need to kind of think things through before they have a chance to say it. Other people comes right to you, you're immediately ready, you can speak quickly. And it feels like if there's a little quiet in the room, nobody wants to speak. But let's recognize that everybody processes differently, everyone shares differently. And we want to hear all those voices, all the processors, all the different kinds of speakers. So that is just reiterating what Karina just said. If you've already had a chance to speak, let's wait until everyone else in the room does, and then we'll come back to you. And I believe Nathan is sending us to the breakouts. I did just share the Miro link in the chat. If you'd like to join us in the Miro board, you should come right into our first group. And we will also be taking notes if you'd rather just stay on Zoom. Okay, Nathan, ready.
Welcome back. I believe we're getting people back now.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everyone. I believe, Marnie, are we going to break? All right, so we have a break planned for now, a 10-minute break. We will see you back here in 10 minutes.
Recording stopped.
Welcome back. All right. So as you all are coming back, now we are trying to ensure that we've gotten your feedback from that first group. Again, focused primarily on who do we need to hear from, right? What are the voices that we're missing? How can we get those in the room? So we're going to do a quick round robin from each of the rooms. I will go ahead and start since I'm already speaking. Barney, will you share your screen so people can follow along? In Clackamas, what we talked about were big categories of groups. So kids and families with socio-emotional needs or SPED needs kind of was a key component. Schools without PTAs, right? That without strong advocates is what one group, another big group that was missing. And then neighborhood communities with schools and located programs, just neighborhood communities in general. There was another big group that wasn't a school group around Spanish communities, specifically the emerging bilinguals. And then a feeling that what we need to hear from PPS, right? And I think this was around specifically a desire to better understand the series of decisions that were the drivers for the scenarios. In terms of the school communities that folks want to better understand, it is Lent communities, or the Lent family, families, Lane families, Whitman families, and then CSS families. So those are the main groups that people felt needed to be better represented in our group. Can we get Columbia to share, please?
Yeah, so we also talked about Lent a lot, that's those voices we haven't heard much from yet, and concerns that the scenarios would break up the Lent community, and that their voice needed to be at the table. Bridger is another school that people would like to hear more from. The Lewis community, even though it hasn't been discussed as much, that both scenarios show a large boundary adjustment for Lewis, and yet there hasn't been a lot of input or committee representation from that school. Talked about, yes, also not hearing enough from students, and the fact that, we're designing these buildings, or we're actually making plans for these schools that will impact students, and that they're not part of this process in a significant way. Also just some discussion on the distribution of information and how at certain schools staff seem to be more aware of what's going on as opposed to families, and so there's a bit of a disconnect there. Families feel like they're the last to know, and there's the perception that plans are final when they are actually just proposals, but then that produces a feeling of powerlessness amongst families when they feel like those decisions have already been made and it's too late to participate.
Okay, Willamette, please.
Jenny, do you want to share out, or shall I? I think with no camera and muted, that's me.
That's all you.
I'm sorry, I'm happy to. I wasn't expecting to, but I took the notes. Absolutely
Okay.
can. We talked about some specific schools that weren't necessarily heavily involved in conversations. Lewis, Selwood, there was some comment from Richmond and Japanese DLI, but there was also discussion on SPED families and also families that have kids in specialized programs that we aren't discussing right now and how they may be impacted. There was a lot of discussion also about families just within the neighborhood in general, people that may be in boundary change areas or in areas where their neighborhood program may be dissolved for a DLI program or CSS. So really wanting to get more input from the neighborhood. And then also students came up as not being included in the discussion.
Great. Anything else from any of those rooms? Sounds good. I think we've gone through all three, right? So now we want to transition to another small breakout. So we'll send you back into your same rooms to have now conversations specific to the proposal A and proposal B, right? And recognizing that we want to really focus on what's working and what isn't working in those particular scenarios. We've had them now for about a week. I know that communities have been talking about them, but not only what's working and what isn't working, but more importantly, to get to the point that was being made earlier, these are preliminary proposals, right? So what can be tweaked to have the greatest benefit to the most impacted communities, right? And knowing that we're going to be talking later about the creation of a proposal C, but right now, if we're talking about the two proposals we have, what are good elements about it, or what's working and what isn't working, and how can we tweak them to ensure that we're providing the greatest benefit to the most impacted communities? So Marnie, will you please take us to our rooms, please?
So again, I think Nathan is going to send us.
Yes.
And we're going to just be in the same area we were on Saturday. So we have all of the maps, we have all of the links back and forth. It is a lot. It's a little like drinking from a fire hose, but we'll help you walk through it in our small rooms. And each room will have someone from Flow so that we can be pulling data at the same time. So are we ready, Nathan?
We are recording. Yes. I don't know if you all heard it, but it sounded like it. We were stopped, then we came back, then we were stopped again. Welcome back. That was a good amount of time to be processing in our rooms. Why don't we start the share back? Marnie, will you start the share back in your room? Oh, you're on mute. I don't know if it's going to be you or it's going to be Jenny, but
it's I can't share my screen necessarily because we were sharing all over the maps, but people
yeah, just verbally share.
So I'll go ahead. And which is hard because we don't have the sticky notes to look at. We heard a lot of not understanding why the guardrails are what they are. And maybe if we did understand why the guardrails were in place, it would be easier to look at A and B and weigh them. So it's like weighing two undetermined weights, and how can you decide which one is heavier? We heard that. We heard about, in A, we heard about Woodstock being specifically broken into pieces, and that it would be great if it wasn't broken into so many pieces, or if the kids could stay in community, if there was a way for the kids who are moving to stay in community. And then Judy talked about the phasing that is going to happen, that is always a consideration, which was a good help. We also heard a lot about boundaries being potentially historically in place for redlining reasons. So that are we sticking to traditional boundaries because they're traditional, or are we sticking to boundaries because they make sense? And also that impacts children crossing very busy roads. So are they geographically thought out well? Yeah, I know I'm missing.
Marnie is trying to take the notes there. Another one that's along that line that stood out to me was the avoiding having kids cross major roadways, and like, if possible, actually addressing some of those circumstances now as something that that folks would like to see more of.
Okay.
We also heard that CSS is causing a lot of ripples and repercussions, that it looks like we're working very hard to keep CSS intact, which is causing all of these issues everywhere else.
Okay. I'll go ahead and share similarly for the Clackamas room. And Dana and Kathleen, tell me if I'm missing anything here. We had a lot of conversations specific to kind of tweaks to the different scenarios. Also had conversations around natural boundary lines and kind of major roads. And then also an interest in trying to meet some of these enrollment goals in terms of size of schools led to some boundaries, certainly mostly in proposal A, but in both proposals that seemed arbitrary, right? They just seem like they don't follow any natural geography or major roads. And so that was a concern. We talked a lot about the sort of how the math worked and thinking about the impact to lower SES schools as we sort of do this eastward shift, right? Peeling off some lower SES students and moving them to lower SES schools as you move east. That felt, that was concerning. We heard from the Harrison Park community concerns around, especially from their dual language community, concerns around wanting to be walking distance to both schools, certainly, but even that concern about a whole school DLI model, certainly a whole school Chinese DLI, and could that make that school potentially a target for racism and or attacks? And then there was a lot of conversations around wanting specific data. I think Elizabeth talked about, there were a number of folks that talked about wanting a clear description of what are the demographics racially and socioeconomically for currently or in 2021, and then what are the by school, and then what are those demographics in the future under proposal A, proposal B, and then any proposal C that is developed. So Jed walked everyone how to get through that through the dashboard, but a desire for that to be a prepared document that's, you know, a long spreadsheet, even if it needs to be, but because people, you know, want to be able to refer to that as they're looking at ResJ impacts. Anything else, Kathleen or Dana, that I missed that you thought was important from our group?
I would say the only other thing that I heard come up was just a discussion about test scores and looking at where the most recent ones currently, you know, laid out, and what we could do to kind of equalize that across our schools.
To use this as an opportunity to get more equity in that. Yep. Okay. And last but not least, our third room, which is Willamette.
Or Columbia.
Or sorry, Columbia.
So Natasha and Misha and Margaret, feel free to chime in. I'll try to get through some of these. I know it was a little challenging to write the notes on the board this time because there's so much space. But so we talked about first, you know, the definition of impacted, right? That it seems to be limited to whether or not a student is displaced or has to move, but that there might be other considerations in terms of the types of programs they have access to and resources and how that might be measured. And then also, what does it mean if a school for example, falls below the threshold for enrollment, and does that mean that they would have less impact potentially to programs than they have now? So Mount Tabor was given as an example of one that under, I don't recall if it's one or both scenarios, falls under that, that enrollment threshold. And performance indicators that should go beyond academics to also include some of the other measurements, like whether students feel safe in their communities, social emotional benefits, things like that. Talked about Lent in particular, and there's reporting back that the immersion teachers were resistant to this change because they really felt like there was a clear benefit to having neighborhood students in the school. And so that led to a lot of discussion about the, the benefits of having neighborhood kids in the same school as the DLI students, in terms of promoting diversity and that cross-pollination. Talked also, as in your group, Karina, just needing more information on specific demographic breakdown by race, and Adriel spoke a lot about the need to specifically understand how these proposals would impact Black communities, and giving as an example the fact that there are so few Black teachers in Oregon. I think she recited a statistic is less than 1%, and the challenge of having representation in staff and the teachers for Black students. And then some concerns voiced that whether this was an accessible process for our families of color, and that they felt that they could have a voice in this. So there's some concern expressed on that. Natasha or anyone else, would you like to chime in?
Thank you, everybody. Oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Margaret.
I think that the other piece that I heard was really making sure that we're highlighting what describing the connection between program and size of school, and also as students move from one school to the next, like what does that shift for specific student populations, right? So I think Mount Tabor was highlighted as an example, but just being cognizant of how do we capture, what does that look like, not just across the quadrant, but within communities within the coalition here.
Thank you. Okay. Deep breath, everybody. Can we power through one more breakout group? Because now we really want to start to have a conversation around kind of what are the drivers for, as the district is looking to create a proposal C, right? What are the drivers that we need to be looking at to be able to do that, right? When Flow Analytics creates a new draft proposal, and partly to address some of the issues we're talking about, also to address kind of educationally the concerns that we have around single strand DLI, right? What criteria should be used to lead to better outcomes for neighborhood and DLI students? Again, what could provide the greatest benefit to the most impacted families? So that's what we want to focus on for our last breakout group of the night. Any questions about that charge or that exercise? Now you all get to play Flow Analytics and start to figure out what our drivers are going to be. Okay. Nathan, will you carry us back, please?
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Gail. All right. That was a lot. So thank you to all of you. I think, are we all back, Marnie? We are all back together. So Marnie's going to be sharing for us. Why don't we go maybe, I don't know, we'll go Willamette first this time.
Okay. I am not as good at reporting out on these, so please help me if I miss. We kind of talked about what would it be like if it was in a perfect world first, and we said, what if the driver was keeping neighborhoods intact over special programs intact? What if there were neighborhood schools that all the kids wanted to go to and the families wanted to live near? That was one idea. And what would it take to get there? One idea was a funding model that supported all the schools equally, so that they all were equitable and it wasn't about going to a good school or a bad school. We talked about everyone being super excited. We talked about feeling the weight of having to make these decisions and not having the same data and experience as PPS. And so that a lot of this, people are feeling need to be guided by PPS and experience. Let's see, what if we involved more schools so that what would equity look like without lotteries? Is a lottery equitable? We talked about whole school DLI and how that affects students. And we heard that it is a successful model for a parent and their neighborhood and their whole school model. And we also heard that often when schools, Dr. Proctor shared with us that often where there are co-located programs in schools, the BIPOC students tend to not perform as well as they do in schools without a co-located DLI program. Right. Yes, so if not that they're in that DLI program, but that they're in a school that is being impacted by having a DLI co-located program in their school, they are impacted. And that, I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. So not in relationship to the white students in a co-located program school, but in relationship to schools that don't have DLI programs in them. We would love to have students live within walking distance to their schools. No single strand neighborhoods. Harrison Park co-located works well for their community. Seems that they work well in some areas, not so well in others. Argument for whole model and against. Let's see. I hope I captured that correctly, Dr. Proctor. Also, we heard that it's not just a DLI enrichment program for folks who are being allowed to go to DLI programs, but it's a cultural maintenance program for many. So there's a lot of brown folks who are going to these schools as a cultural maintenance, not to learn a language necessarily. Did I get it? Did I get it, everyone who was in that room with me? Did I capture it?
Okay. All right. So moving now, yes, to Columbia. Oh, I don't know who's sharing back, but you're on mute, whoever's sharing back.
I forgot we automatically get put on mute.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Margaret, chime in too, if you'd like, because you were so eloquently summarizing our comments at the end there. But there was a lot of discussion around the guardrails and questioning whether DLI should dominate the guardrails as it does, and whether there are other factors that could be considered as guardrails, such as safety, walkability, and equitable distribution of neighborhood programs, and even ensuring that schools don't lose their Title I status. That was discussed as a possible guardrail. So just some ideas there in terms of thinking of a third scenario. That, acknowledging that it was difficult to think of a third scenario, and we don't know what will be done with CSS. And then that led to also additional discussion about, whether there should be a broader analysis of which sites, if there's alternative sites that might be appropriate for relocating CSS. And also, though, acknowledging that CSS is valued and absolutely should still stay part of the Southeast cluster. Some discussion about even our conception of neighborhood boundaries and how that might be tied to the history of redlining, and maybe a more critical view of neighborhood boundaries would be beneficial. see. Talked about the need to see who is enrolled in our DLI programs and how the demographics may have changed over time in terms of the percent of native Spanish speakers versus non-native speakers, to see who is benefiting and if they're, by locating those within Spanish-speaking neighborhoods. Wanting to hear more from families who are enrolled in single-strand DLI programs to see if their experiences have indeed been negative, or if it's been more of a staffing issue. And also comments that in some ways it feels like the input and feedback that we've received from BIPOC stakeholders has not been translated into the scenarios. And so it's expressed concern about that. Are we asking the right questions? Are we listening to the feedback that we've received in developing these scenarios and ensuring there's not a disconnect there? And then it might be helpful to, in presenting the data, not just think about the flow of students, but the flow of money to fund programs and staffing, even though those are interrelated, having a better understanding of that. Anyone else from the group like to chime in?
Okay. I don't hear any, so we've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna go ahead and move us to what we talked about in Clackamas room. Kathleen, do you wanna do the debrief, or do you want me to?
Oh, I can certainly take a crack at it.
Please.
We got a lot of Post-its.
We do.
Anyway, one of the things we talked about were just DLI schools and the research behind whether they should be combined DLI schools or single DLI schools, or co-located, that is, excuse me. We talked about wanting to examine the rationale for keeping Creative Science School a K-8 instead of a K-5, and just understanding the rationale behind that. Wanting to keep robust and balanced enrollment across the middle schools. There was discussion about keeping CSS in the Southeast, and also discussions just about the size of buildings and if co-located programs, for example, CSS and Harrison Park K-5 fitting together in the Clark building, if that's realistic. And then there was also a bit of discussion about what will we do to keep our full immersion schools equitable, should we have full immersion schools, and while focusing on the academic outcomes of all of our students. Was there anything I missed? I know I'm trying to go through these quickly.
No, I think those were I mean, we did, we talked about how many transitions and upheavals, like having that be a driver, right? I don't know if you stated that one, having, wanting to understand what communities in the recent past have been asked to already bear the burden of some of these changes. And can that be a driver to minimize impact to those families? I think that was it. I think those are the main pieces. Anyone else in Clackamas? Did we miss anything? Okay. Marnie, will you stop sharing for a moment? Thank you. So I think with that, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Dr. O, to close us out for the evening.
Again, it's been a very busy evening, a lot of thinking, a lot of ideas, a lot of suggestions. We want to thank you all very much for your participation, for staying fully engaged. We had a lot of conversations and a lot of discussions about challenges, about proposals, about suggestions and ideas. We're hoping that you hang on to all of these in an effort to create a third scenario. We also want to thank you for centering all student needs, especially our BIPOC students and their families. I just want to also remind us that we will delay the listening sessions for our communities. This is because we do need time to create a third option. A date to start the listening sessions will be announced shortly. thank you again to our school leaders who continue to provide a safe space for the broader school communities so everyone's voice is represented at the table. As we all know, a lot of our communities of color may not come to these meetings and may not come to the district to speak with us, but they would definitely come to the school sites to speak with you and meet with you because they are comfortable with your environment. Their children attend your school and they just feel that you are very, very trustworthy. So they will talk with you. Please continue to gather all that information on our behalf and make sure that we get them. Again, please complete the feedback form before you leave. Your input is of great value to us. We use it to design our lessons going up, sessions going forward. And of course, we will see you again on the 18th of November. So again, the listening sessions are postponed. They will not start next week as was proposed. They will start at a later date and we will make sure that you do know that date. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your commitment. And thank you so much for believing in us, PPS. It's a pleasure working with you all. Meeting adjourned.